The start of Singapore's history as an independent nation was quite unusual. While a lot of countries around the world had to fight bitterly to claim independence, or in the best-case scenario, were able to negotiate it with the country they were claiming it from. Independence was kind of forced on Singapore. The tiny island was once a state of Malaysia, and throughout its history was used as a trade port by colonial empires. This led to the region becoming very diverse, but also very tense between all the groups that call it home. In the aftermath of the Second World War, following a bitter occupation by Japanese forces, Singapore had to be rebuilt practically from scratch. For the decades following, it was basically just a city-sized slum, with most residents living in complete poverty. Sensing the tensions that could arise from such a diverse group of people living in such an unforgiving environment, Singapore was cast out from Malaysia in 1965. The first thing that the new country had going for it was a unique brand of benign authoritarianism. The new government knew that for the country to have any hope of fixing its issues, it would need a strong, decisive hand, and that's exactly what they got. One of the first things the government did after coming to power was to reclaim vast tracts of land from private ownership at below market rates to build affordable public housing. When people argue that their economy should be run like Singapore, they normally overlook this detail. Any policy at this scale in any advanced economy around the world today would basically be political suicide. Housing is still highly controlled in the country to this day, with a unique blend of central planning and hardcore free market mechanics. Income taxes in Singapore are famously very low. As of this year, income tax rates top out at 24%. That's only for people earning more than 1 million Singaporean dollars per year, or roughly 750,000 US dollars. That's the free market side with minimal government intervention. But at the same time, that 20% of workers' salaries are still mandatorily taken by the government. But instead of going to fund government spending, it's put into a large communal investment fund that people can then use to put a deposit on a subsidized house. In addition to this 20%, an additional 16% is provided by the worker's employer as contributions towards the same fund, which is also used to fund retirement and healthcare. This means that at minimum, people in Singapore are saving at least 36% of their income, which is double the average savings rate of the USA. Singapore also has very diligent savers, even outside of these four savings measures, with the average resident keeping 54.6% of their earnings. Now, a high savings rate means very little of the people of the country are not earning much. So the next thing the government had to do was attract industries that made sense in the tiny island nation. Early on, the country had very few advantages over its larger regional peers. They had more people, more resources, and more land to set up operations. But Singapore still had a few tricks up its sleeve. Perhaps the country's greatest global advantage is its amazing geographic position at the tip of the Malacca Straits, which is the single busiest shipping lane in the world. The reason the country existed as a trading port back in the colonial days were for exactly the same reasons. But now the people of the country had an opportunity to benefit from that position for themselves. One of Singapore's biggest industries today is a far cry from the glamour of global finance. It's basically a gas station for the world's cargo ships. As Asia developed as a center of low-cost manufacturing and countries around the world started trading more intensely with one another, Singapore set up major oil facilities to bring in oil from countries in the South Pacific and the Persian Gulf and sell it to all the ships passing through the natural bottleneck of the Malacca Straits. Given its location, and because crude oil freighters are passing through the area anyway, it's home to the world's largest bunkering port, offering prices even lower than the Gulf states themselves. Singapore does produce some oil for itself, but it's only around 20,000 barrels per day, which is a tiny fraction of the total oil volume moved through the country. To make itself even more of a one-stop shop for shipping needs, it has developed the region's largest commodities exchange, where companies and speculators can secure prices for resources that get traded all over Asia. The government's unique blend of authority and freewheeling capitalism was again instrumental in getting this industry off the ground. Despite its tiny size and modest manpower, the country has an economic output of almost $500 billion US dollars, making it the 33rd largest economy in the world. Much larger countries like the UAE, Vietnam, and even Malaysia, the country directly to its north that has more manpower, more landmass, and even more natural resources. But it wasn't always like this. Singapore, just 5 short decades ago, was a desperately poor country still suffering from a long history of occupation. The concentrated success that this small island has been able to achieve in such a short amount of time is why so many economists and commentators are excited about the idea of other countries replicating that success and becoming the Singapore of their respective regions. The Singapore of South America, the Singapore of Africa, and even the Singapore of Asia are all titles that several countries around the world have been given for trying to replicate the success of this city-state, although they probably didn't think that last one through. If a poor island devoid of resources and global political capital can go on to become one of the wealthiest economies in the world, then it stands to reason that just about any economy could achieve the same thing. Unfortunately, the success of Singapore is going to be extremely hard to replicate. The exact combination of factors that the country had going for it basically just doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. What this means is that there is never going to be another Singapore of some other region. Another common misunderstanding is that Singapore's success has hinged off glamorous industries taking place in glass skyscrapers. It's easy to see why, with pictures of Marina Bay, stories about billionaires from around the world making it their home, and even depictions in modern movies. But the reality is far from that, and even most economists ignore what truly made Singapore a success to begin with. So what can regular economies learn from the rapid development of Singapore, and could it be applied to their own countries? What was it that made Singapore so successful? And finally, why is it almost impossible to replicate the success in other countries around the world? Being in the right place at the right time and having the right authority to make the right deals was the foundation of Singapore's economic success. It's unfair to call it all luck, because it did capitalize on this early success by reinvesting into its people and its industries. But had it been located anywhere else in the world apart from at the corner of what would go on to be the epicenter of global trade, it probably would have been anything nearly as remarkable as it is today. The oil industry requires major capital investment to be globally competitive. But the impoverished country of Singapore in the mid-1970s would not have been able to make that investment itself. It needed to attract multinational oil companies to set up the industry for it in exchange for sharing the profits into the future. We're investing in a foreign country, especially one as new and potentially unstable as Singapore. International companies are going to want a compelling reason to be there. Since Singapore had few oil reserves of its own, that wasn't going to be enough by itself. The potential for its geographic position was understood, but economists have argued that what really made it a logical choice was the freedoms that foreign oil companies were given to operate in the country, and the security that they were given from an effectively one-party state that could guarantee consistency of policy. Another benefit that Singapore had was that it adopted an English common law legal system from its previous colonizers, which is a well-regarded and widely understood system for settling commercial disputes, which was much more attractive to international companies than alternative systems in the region. Friends, what are your thoughts on this issue? Do let us know by commenting below. If you liked the video, and you want us to cover more details about this, then feel free to drop a comment for the same. See you in the next interesting video. Until then, thank you for watching this video until the end.